Today I'm talking to Ruofei Shang, who is from Guangzhou in China and is a third-year student studying social cultural anthropology. Welcome, Ruofei.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, I'm delighted you're here. Thank you very much. I'm very intrigued by what you have to share with us today because you are someone whose life went on a totally different trajectory from the one you probably grew up anticipating. So I think it would be really good to start from there and you tell us about how life changed for you.
Yeah, totally. I was born, just as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Guangzhou, China. It's a city in southern China. And when it was time for high school, I moved to Jordan in the Middle East to an international boarding school. And then after 4 years of high school, I moved to America for college, and now I'm in my third year studying social cultural anthropology. Um, and the way that you said, this is not something that people normally would expect, or not like a path that people follow. One thing, obviously, um, going to Jordan, a country that people barely know of. I personally didn't really know Jordan when I knew that I was going to Jordan. And then coming to America is kind of a consequent choice that I made afterwards.
Mm. And when you were at school and there wasn't like a vision on your part or your parents' part for you to go to Jordan or any other country, was there? You were just planning to follow the school system within China and go from there. So how did the whole Jordan piece come about?
Yeah, so in China, basically, when you move from different school levels, for example, from middle school to high school to college, you have to take these entry exams, and they're very competitive and they have different subjects. And in order to get into the school that you want to go to, you have to meet the baseline for the scores for that
Mm,
school. So each school is different. And I wanted to go to the high school that's affiliated with my middle school. So there's a lot of, school pride, and also it is in fact one of the best schools in the province. So it's not just like school pride, but also the desire to go to a really good school. But I missed by a few points. So that would have been like, the traditional or like the typical way that people follow is just to take the test, go to whatever school that you get into, and eventually go to like Chinese university. And so afterwards, I also took the exam for the international school of the same school because they have different sectors. And I got in. And now it's more out of school pride for me to go rather than thinking, oh, the international school is a really good school. Because my dad later on was saying how, oh, I think if you eventually want to study abroad in a foreign university that is English speaking, then you should be able to fully use English, reading, writing, speaking, listening, all of the skills. And he thinks that if I stayed in China, even if I was in an international school, I would be speaking Chinese with my friends all the time because, a lot of students would be Chinese students. And I'll only use English in the classroom or when I have exams and things, and I won't
mm,
be able to actually practice the language. um so he thought it would be better for me to um move to an English speaking environment earlier, so then by the time college comes around, I'll be able to fully use the language. And before that, we never really thought about studying abroad at all, even though growing up, I've always been enrolled in like English extracurricular classes, and English has always been my best subject in school, comparing to math and physics and other subjects. Um, but I've just never really thought about it because I just thought I was gonna follow the same path that most of the people, like 95% of the people follow. And here I am finishing, ninth grade in China because it's like 3 years and then 3 years. So I finished ninth grade, and my dad was like, "Oh, let's go abroad." And by the time we actually decided, it was way too late to apply for um, American high school or like other boarding schools in other Western countries. So he was like, "Oh, I know this person whose daughter goes to the school in Jordan. Let's go." And it's completely like a full circle moment where I didn't even know the country existed. I didn't know much about it. I just knew it was in the Middle East. And I had all of these, um, stereotypes or whatever, like perceptions of how Middle East is supposed to be. Um, and I got there and lived there for 4 years, and now here I am going back to learn more Arabic and also kind of choosing Middle East as my mo main academic focus.
Mm. So it's really supported influencing your directions, your choices, and everything. Um, and just going back to the bit when you were living in Jordan, so you said your father said, "Let's go," but did he accompany you to Jordan? Did you literally, did your parents take you, or did you go independently? Because you were young, weren't you, when you joined the school in Jordan?
Yeah, I moved when I was 14. My dad has visited Jordan before, but he didn't go with me to Jordan. My mom and her friend, so like a very close family friend, they sent me off to Jordan. So they brought like they were just kind of extra suitcases carrier. So they brought extra suitcases, everything that I needed to move um, with me, and they stayed in Jordan for a week or so. So they both stayed with me at a school, at like the guest house. And also they were traveling in Jordan. So I didn't really get to see them a lot. And in the beginning, it was very difficult because I like had no idea what the environment was going to be. Um, and I had difficulty understanding English because I've only been around uh, like Chinese people speaking English.
Mm,
Um, and growing up, the extracurriculars I was like enrolled in were actually British teachers. Um, so I had a lot of like difficulties, but then my parents weren't actually able to be there to support me in the beginning because my mom just kind of like dropped me off and then went back to China because she also has a job. And my dad has never actually visited. And from there on, I've just been like independent in the boarding school.
mm. And presumably in the boarding school, there were students from everywhere. So English would have been the common language, but you had to contend with different accents, different styles of English. So that would make it a little bit more challenging. But at the
Yeah,
same time, I
totally.
guess everybody had, well, some people would have shared your dilemma. So there would have been, you wouldn't have been alone in English being your second language.
Yeah. For our school, we had around, we do advertise ourselves as international school, and we follow the American education system. So we have the advanced placement system, so it's called AP. And most of our teachers are either have Western education background or are from Western countries.
Mm,
Um, and as for students, I would say it's around like 90% Middle Eastern slash Arab students. And then beyond the 90%, because that also means that within the 90%, there's probably like 85, 90% like local Jordanians, and then there are
mm,
international students who are from other Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, some from Lebanon, and uh, for the other international students, we also get a few American students, whether they're embassy kids or they're on exchange programs. We have a few Asian students. When I first got there, in my year, it was just me and two other Chinese people. But then the number kind of grow later on in sophomore year and also as other students transfer. Um, and then you also get like Indonesian students who grew up in Saudi Arabia because their parents work in companies in Saudi Arabia. So you kind of get people from all different backgrounds, and
Mm,
um, it's quite interesting.
mm. And I'm curious now about something. Now that you've defined all of that, um, it seems very natural that you would study social cultural anthropology. But do you think the social cultural anthropology idea was born from those experiences, or do you think it came earlier in life?
It absolutely did not come earlier in life. My parents, both of them have gone through medical trainings. So they actually met in like med school. So they had this whole like, dream and like vision about how, oh, we're gonna build medical legacy and like doctor legacy in our family. So like, from ever since I was born, everyone in my family and all of our family friends, all they ever talk about is how I am going to become a doctor, or like med school professor or whatever. Um, and so if I follow the conventional path in China, that's what I would have done. And part of the reason I didn't end up choosing going through medical training is freshman year, I absolutely failed my biology class. Not as in like the like getting an F, but like I just did not enjoy it. My um like the subject, the class was really fun,
Mm,
we were able to, do different projects, and I just sat there and I was like, I don't think this is for me. Like I can't imagine going to college and studying biology. And I didn't get a good grade. Um, and so that's when I told my parents, I was like, I don't think I can become a doctor. Like, I don't even like biology, that's the bare minimum. And they were like, well, that's fair. Then what do you want to do? Because kind of in their world, it's like, doctor is the only option. Like, if you're not going to choose doctor, like, what are you going to do? Um, and that's when, like, entering sophomore year and junior year, that's when I kind of started thinking about, what am I going to do? Like, other than being a doctor, because that's kind of like the one thing that I ever thought about. And part of the other reason is moving from the Chinese education system to the American one. Or, at the time I didn't know I was actually going to American university, but the American system, we do follow, the American system, um, is I realized you have to go through undergrad and you have to apply for medical school. But then in China, it's kind of, as long as you get the score, you can just go to a medical school.
mm,
Uh, so there's like whole process of, I have to do activities related to, you know, uh like medical training, or I have to do internships in hospitals, or like, have positions in labs. So part of me being lazy, slightly lazy, I was just telling my mom, like, I don't think I can go through, the whole 10 years, 15 years of training. Um, so sophomore year and junior year, I started thinking about what I want to do. And I've always done photography. I started doing photography in middle school, and art has always kind of been not the biggest part of my life, but it's pretty consistent part of my life. Growing up, I've always done like a little bit in drawing. I've done a little bit of sculpture in high school. And I've like tiptoed here and that there. Um, and so I was like, oh, maybe I can do photography. But then once again, the reality is, people talk about that all the time about like going into something art related is how are you going to find a job? How are you going to make money? And especially when I know I'm going to a foreign country where, um, immigration and also visa problems are very real. Like I can't have as much freedom as I would like to pursue something that doesn't guarantee, like a work visa, or
mm,
guarantee how much I'm going to pay for my rent. Um, and junior year is kind of determining a determining year. My junior year and senior year is kind of a determining year. Junior year, I took, subjects that are APR history or psychology, and I kind of got to explore different kinds of social sciences and humanities. And then senior year, I took a class with one of my teachers who actually did his PhD on social cultural anthropology in Palestine. So that's how I knew about the subject, social cultural anthropology. And I really got to spend the year asking him and reading his work and also other work that he provided with, us with in the field. And that's when I realized, oh, social cultural anthropology is actually very flexible. I have a lot of different interests, so I can kind of combine different interests. It's a very like interdisciplinary subject, um, and I'll have the freedom to study, like pull from different, regions and pull from different subjects and different angles and perspectives, and still make something out of it instead of
Mm,
something that's like very rigid and I'll have to study one thing. So that's how I like kind of got to social cultural anthropology.
mm. And in going back to Jordan, how different was that from when you were 14 and in Jordan until you went to America? Because although you were independent at 14 from your family, I imagine your school life as a boarding school was fairly cocooned, whereas when you went back as a young adult, you went fully independently. You didn't even necessarily have somewhere lined up for you to stay. You'd have had to arrange everything, whereas at least boarding school gave you somewhere to sleep, somewhere to stay, and so on. So how was that as an experience going back to somewhere that was familiar but different?
Yeah. I the first reaction that I had when I upon landing and getting on a taxi and then seeing the view, I was just thinking, how am I suddenly an adult? Like when I got placed back to that environment, because I left during COVID. So I left 2020 December. I spent, as long as I could in Jordan. And then it was a winter break for my senior year. And my parents were like, we don't know how it's gonna go. Let's come back. And then my school also wasn't sure how everything was gonna go because for the first semester, we kind of did a system of a bubble. So everyone was on campus and no one was allowed to leave. Like if you leave, you can't come back. And the second semester with more COVID outbreaks in the country, and also they weren't sure if we want to do again, like 2 weeks quarantine and then bring people back to campus again. With all the uncertainty, I kind of left without knowing that I wouldn't go back because my parents were like, "Oh yeah, like I feel like we can still go back for spring semester," but it literally wasn't until 2 days before my flight going back kind of all of like the Chinese parents were like, we feel like it's a better choice to like stay in China. Um, and so I like bought my prom dress, I brought my like shoes and everything, everything that I thought was gonna happen. I got all the graduation gifts I was gonna give my teachers. Um, and then I just like abruptly, like weren't I wasn't going back. Um, so um when I first got back, the feeling was, how am I suddenly
When you first got
20
back to Jordan?
to Jordan? Yes,
Yeah.
like how am I 20 years old, independent and not the 14, 16 years old myself anymore. And the reality was, uh, I thought I knew a lot about navigating Jordan,
Mm,
but because um, during high school, we can only go off campus during the weekends as full boarders. And you have to get on school buses. They have designated trips, whether to the supermarket or to the mall or to this art gallery or whatever.
mm,
So they take you for a period of time and then you have to get on back on the bus at that specific time. Otherwise, you can't miss a bus or you'll be like, trapped off campus. And also like not any teacher would have allowed that to happen.
mm,
Um, so I didn't know how to use Uber or the public transit in Jordan. And public transit, to be fair, in Jordan is not the best or most accessible. So I had to figure that whole part out myself. And all of my friends from the summer, they were like, "Oh my God, like you lived in Jordan, you must have known all of these things." And I had this feeling of like anxiety of like, wait a minute, I actually don't know a lot, as much as I would love to. Um, and another feeling was it felt weird navigating the city by myself, without a teacher next to me, without them telling you, oh, this is, if you're just taking a walk, you should totally go check this place out. Or if you want to look for a restaurant, you should totally go to this area. It's kind of entirely up to me where I want to go. And I suddenly have this all like just freedom that I wasn't expecting,
mm,
and I wasn't used to. Um, and uh, and I honestly like very much enjoyed it, but it was just a weird feeling that I had to adapt to it in the beginning.
mm,
Um, but also going back to Jordan, kind of this time with a mission to really readapt to the culture and also learning the language. I definitely felt more comfortable using language or kind of push myself to use Arabic. While in high school, I felt a little self-conscious about, oh, I feel like, I don't speak the best Arabic. It would probably be easier for me to talk to people in English. And this time, because I had a purpose of, I want to practice my Arabic, it actually opened up a lot more, different
mm,
experiences for me when I was talking to people at the different markets, Friday markets, and I would talk in Arabic and they'll be like, oh my God, like, where are you from? Because people don't meet a lot of Asian people who speak Arabic. And I have interesting conversations with people. And some of them are like, oh yeah, like they're like, Jordan is one of the most, hospitable countries in the world. And they're always like, oh, you should totally come back. I would love to practice my Arabic with you. And it's definitely a very different experience than when I was back in high school.
mm. What was the transition from Jordan to America like? Because now listening to you, I realized you didn't go from Jordan to America because due to COVID, you went Jordan back to China and then from China to America. So, what was it like going to America, having had a taste of being back home and back in a familiar environment? How was that transition?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing about just simply moving from country to country is I had all of these expectations or stereotypes that it was just ingrained in my mind, whether through education or popular media or however. So when I moved to Jordan, I didn't know that much about Islam, and then even just like friends and family around me, they will always ask, "Oh, do you have to, cover up? Do you have to wear the veil all the time?" And there were all these, different stereotypes that come with it. And I think going to America, that was less intense because my Jordanian school experience was, AP system, American system, and I started consuming more American media stuff. I watched TV shows, American TV shows, and I listened to, you know, primarily English music. And a lot of my friends from the time were international students, meaning from America, not international students, not from Jordan. So I was able to get more contact with the general American culture, compared to, I had no exposure to like Middle Eastern or Jordanian culture at all. So the transition was slightly smoother than it had been back in high school. And also I was at a very different age, 18, 19 years old is very different from when I moved to Jordan,
Mm,
like 14 years old. And 14 years old, I just came kind of without consciousness of my surrounding.
mm,
I was just thinking, oh, a new country, oh, like new languages, whatever. But then when I came to America, I had more like social awareness of how do I interact with people and how my perception of America is different from, the actual experience in America. And um, one thing that was very big to me was the language, um, because I think in high school, in the international school, no one really talked about like your accent or the way you talk or whatever, because you kind of get people from all around, and everyone speaks English in a different way. And then when I moved to America, um, some people, when they know that I am not from America because I don't identify as Asian American because I wasn't born and raised here. Some people assume that I was Asian American from, the way I talk or like the way I act, because I have been, very immersed in primarily American pop culture. So I know a lot of like cultural references. Um, But then when they realize that I am not from America, the first thing that they will say will be like, "Oh, but your English is so good." And that's one thing that like also was very different when entering classes because I also kind of like expected everyone in America to be good at English, where it's kind of a lack of like, relativity like on my part because if I assumed everyone was good at English in America, like, I am kind of assuming everyone in China is good at Chinese, but that's not the case. So I had to take writing classes and in my international private school experience, we went through a lot of writing training and they really valued education. Um, and that's when I realized the American culture that was exposed to is kind of very like elitist and different kind of American culture uh, than what you would say like if you take from like Midwest or Southern or West Coast versus East Coast, there's so much to America that I can't just say American culture. Because Americans are going to define American culture differently based on where they are from.
Mm,
Um, and uh so from like that education, so like I have friends who, went through the whole public school experience in America, also private school. But then like the public school experience is also different based on your school district. Some of them have really good um systems and some of them have just, completely, you have like 5,000 people in the same school or my school was so tiny, it was around 120 people in the 1 year. Um and I took writing classes and I took all of these classes, but then I met people who, can't really write well in English, and that really caught me off guard. With that, like I like fully expected people to be like, oh, like, Americans are supposed to be that English, and that's also one of the like racist like rhetoric that people use, as in, oh, speak English. You can't speak other languages in this country, or you're expected to, speak English well. Um, so. I like once again, the expectation versus reality is completely different, especially when I had so much expectation to this place compared to when I didn't have that much experience, like
mm,
expectation to Jordan.
mm. And how do you look towards the future, knowing that nothing is a given? If you're an American student and you're in America, just as if you'd stayed in China, your future was a given. Well, as I said, everything's uncertain, but it's a given
But
in
you
the
can
sense
always
of,
go back home and
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Your family's there. You can, obviously you can return to China, but there isn't the same. If you wanted to just stay in America, that's not a given. That's what I was pointing to. So you have a lot of
yeah.
decisions and choices to make, and some will be made for you. So how do you feel about facing the future?
Yeah, I think it's another anxiety that sometimes because currently I'm third year, so people still say like, oh, you have time to figure it out, you still have your senior year to explore what you want to do.
Mm,
But because of, all the visa problem and also really having to hone down on what I want to like the kind of job I want to secure, I think the timeline is like has shrunk a lot more compared to if you're an American student, where you have the freedom to, if I want to go into law school and I'm not sure yet, I can take a gap year. But for like international students, like generally speaking, after you graduate, for non-STEM majors, like non-science majors, you get 1 year of working visa called OPT. But for STEM majors, you get 2 years. So like
mm,
state-sponsored visa. So you don't need to get, sponsor visa from companies or whatever. And then after that, you have to have your company or whatever, wherever you work, sponsor your visa. Um, or if you choose to pursue a master's degree or a PhD, your school will sponsor a student visa. Um, so I can't just have the freedom of I'm gonna, take 3 months off and not work and come back to working. Um, I just can't randomly say, oh, I'm gonna go back to China and come back. Because if I want to come back, I will have to, have a job, and have that visa in place. Um, So I need to start thinking about what I want to do in the future a lot earlier compared to other people, and probably have a set plan in mind a lot earlier. Um, I know my long-term goal is to pursue a PhD degree because I am genuinely like very passionate about anthropology and very invested. Yesterday was just World Anthro Day. And I was just thinking about I'm so glad to have found this, major that I know I will want to dedicate 5 years, 6 years of my life to study a subject on. And I know that's not, what a lot of people experience. I have friends who have kind of taken classes all over the place and still don't know what they want to go into. So I'm glad I know long-term wise what I want to pursue, but like short term speaking, what do I want to do after graduating? I have all of these different interests. I could do research. I do a lot of marketing and communication work, digital media. So I could go into, communications. I could also do nonprofit or NGOs, and um, but it's just right now at the moment, it's a lot of different options, and I haven't really experienced working in a professional environment of either field. I've done, research for class. I've helped out on research projects during the summers before. That's for research. And then, for marketing and communications, I've, done interns during the semester for my school. Um, and for NGO nonprofit, I've like have friends who are
Mm,
currently working in NGO and nonprofits at the moment. So I haven't really had personal experience. So I still, once again, don't know what exactly I want to do. Um, and part of adulting, the reality of, how am I gonna pay my rent? There's this balance of, doing something I'm passionate about, maybe, going to research, but then being paid, barely minimum wage, or going to nonprofits, doing something it's good for people, community service, but also not getting paid a lot. Or I could go into um, maybe looking into marketing and consulting where you get paid a lot of money, but you might work 9 to 5 and it's not something that you particularly enjoy. Um, so it's a lot of, push and pulls and balancing that I have to consider.
mm. And how do you juggle all those considerations? Because that's you and your future job wise. But how do you juggle all of that with expectations of your family? Do your family have expectations of you? Do they think, well, you've done your education, you should come home now? So how does it fit with that?
Um, some from time to time, my mom is still kind of delusional about me going into somehow medical related field. So she'll be like, "Oh, you should totally take this class on nutrition, It'll be great to become a nutritionist." And because that's kind of like on the margin of medical training, you don't have to go as far as, training for medical school, but you still learn similar things, and it's like it's helpful. And it's my junior year, I'm almost done with my degree. She'll be like, "Oh, you should totally take that." And she has different, reasonings from time to time. My freshman year, she'll be like, "Oh, you should explore that." But then by now, it's like, since you're getting done with your degree, you have all these other classes you could take. You should take that. Um, so some part of her is still hoping that I would pick up something that is related to her field or in general. Um, and because she was a STEM major, she went through medical training. There's a saying in China that as long as you learn or like are good at math, physics, chemistry, you can go anywhere in the world. Um, and she is a very firm believer of that saying. She says that all the time. So she's always saying you should totally take these other classes too. And she's also saying like, oh, you should add a math major or add whatever major to your major because the STEM privilege of having 2 years post grad work privilege.
Mm,
And um, so she definitely tries to influence me on some level to still go towards uh, a sciencey path. Um, but then I am, very certain and I'm very passionate about social cultural anthropology. I know I just can't do science well. I'm not the most sciencey person. I can never solve a math problem. Has never been my forte. Um, so she also, from the beginning of college, actually, my parents and also just kind of everyone around me, because I kind of took an unconventional path, and people were kind of saying the logic was if you already did that for high school, you should come back later on in life. And instead of the logic, some people, the logic would be if you already did that, then you should continue with it,
Yes.
um, so it makes sense because, they're my friends and family in China, so they would want me to go back. And one of the other very emotional moments, this past Chinese New Year, which was just, a week ago, I was calling my family in China, and my grandpa, who normally doesn't say really, very emotional things, he was just like, out of nowhere, he was just like, oh, like, I wish you were back home, and then like you should probably consider moving back, at least to like Hong Kong, because they kind of see Hong Kong as like a middle ground of both
Yes.
being Western and Chinese. Um, and he was saying, oh, at least Hong Kong, so then we can be close because we don't ever see you, and we're not close to you at all. Which is the reality for the past
Mm.
6 years-ish. And especially with COVID, I used to go back home twice a year every summer and winter break. But then with COVID, I only go back home once a year. And then now, as I'm growing up, I have internship and all of these other obligations. I know this summer I'm not going back home. I went back home last summer briefly for a month. So I don't know when is the next time I'm gonna see them. And then, I have my graduation upcoming May. And not this May, but like the upcoming May. But um I probably will also have to find internship. And my grandparents are old, they can't travel long distance. So it is like pretty sad and also like emotional thinking about not having to spend holidays with them and not having to be able to see them all the time. So part of me, I'm like, oh, I could totally, move to a different country, still follow my path of not being conventional. Maybe I could move to Singapore, Malaysia, where, there's a lot of Western and East Asia or Asia in general mixing, or I could go to Hong Kong or Taiwan or um, but another like very realistic problem with going back to China, like mainland China, is um I have a lot of like political opinions that I might not be able to express, or even just in general, I don't get to say have the freedom to post different things or say different things. And I am very involved with social activism and political activism space currently. Um, and I know that if I go back, I won't have the same level of freedom. And I am not someone who ever hold back on expressing those opinions. So I will feel very, not very uncomfortable, but during the past, every time I go back to China, no, it's fine. It's like a short time. But
Mm.
I can't imagine being in a professional environment where I have to conform to some working culture, and not having the freedom of doing the projects that I would like, or saying certain things. And um in the long term speaking, because I do want to become a professor, hopefully, not being able to influence in my students or tell my students about the world as much as I would like to,
Mm.
that would be a big burden on my part. Like it's a
Mm.
mental block that I just can't overcome.
Mm.
So there is a reality of that too.
Mm. Are you working off the assumption that if you work pretty much anywhere else in the world, that you you will be able to express what matters to you, your opinions, and the direction you want to pursue?
I mean, absolutely not. I don't want to, glorify like or whatever villainize China or glorify, other countries and like, you know, um if you because I think every country has its like ugly parts that they don't want people talking about. And the political structures and also just the social structures are very much determined by the people in power, and they don't want to hear about the things that they're not doing well. um So even for Jordan, I know um the criticism towards, the royal family normally is not perceived well by um the people. So then sometimes it's not even about if you will go to jail for saying something like I hate the king or something like that, but it's more of like in a social environment you might be isolated or banished if you were talking, to a group of, very patriotic Jordanian, and then you say something that's like, "Oh, I absolutely hate the country. I think nothing good is from it." I will never say that, but it's kind of depending on where you are and the social context,
Mm,
it definitely varies the degrees of what you can talk about, and how you should approach conversations. And I also know people who are in Jordan who are pretty critical of the government, whether in its, complicity in the general region's violence and things. And For America, one big thing that I often also face the dilemma is um, knowing, like trying to understand, and obviously it's a learning process for me, knowing what the history of America, like, what was America built by, and you know the exploitation of indigenous people, and then back in the 1800s, there were Chinese workers who were working here, but then later on the Chinese Exclusion Act, and knowing the history of my people's involvement and also other people of color's involvement in this country. But once again, in the contemporary world, realizing the system of racism and um, the different systems of privileges, and um, it's kind of complicated to see myself in this environment, knowing my privilege, and it takes a lot of self-reflection, and it takes a lot of um, nights sitting on my bed and just contemplating and walking down the streets and thinking about, oh, I had the privilege to go through, pretty good education from high school, and now I get to go to college, which is something that a lot of people don't even get to do. And I get to learn about all of these things, and what do I do with them? And, you know, there is this dilemma with it when I'm in the US, and um realizing, it's not about if I can't say anything or if I can or cannot do something, but it's more of when I'm an active participant in the system or in this environment, how should I position myself and what
mm,
should I do with my actions, and um, how should I stick to my moralities? Um, yeah.
mm. So do you feel, given you call it a privilege, what you've had, do you consider it a responsibility of yours to give back, to contribute to, um, and to society in some shape or form? And and then if you do, then tasked with the fact that you don't have the ultimate say in where you get to live, if you're not granted a visa or a work visa or whatever, um, does that weigh on you? That sense of responsibility, but without necessarily the full freedom of how that will look, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think uh for my privilege, I think especially in as I like talk to more people and also get to know more people in America and being exposed to a wider demographic of people, I have met people who are first generation college students, as in, their parents have never gone to college, but somehow, runs a business and are rich, and there's this, duality, and also just like honestly like plurality of identity and seeing people's identity, um and um that contributes a lot to uh both the way I interact with people and also how I understand myself. Um, so with the privilege that I have, um, even with day-to-day conversation, because I was actually able to live in Jordan in the Middle Eastern country for 4 years. I know, even though I don't think I fully know, but I know a lot than someone if they didn't stay in the Middle Eastern country. So from the day-to-day conversation, when I meet people who have different backgrounds, I try to, if they have, certain perceptions of what Middle East is like or what Islam is like. And I think in America, so much of the Islamophobia, especially post 9/11, comes from the way that media portrays Arabs or Muslims or Middle Eastern people. Um, and I as much as I have this big grand dream of, transforming education system or transforming the public dialogue or whatever, it's not my own sole responsibility of doing that. I do recognize that, but I think something as small as I can do is through my interaction with my friends, and through interactions, through conversations and dialogues, when, whether in class or outside of classroom, if someone says something that's, racist, I can point them out. If someone says something, if someone just had a confusion, question, um, out of, a good heart, they just simply didn't know, that I can help them with that confusion. Um, a lot of people are curious where I come from, and with, China and US relationship kind of being heightened, and also there is this curiosity as to, Chinese culture, in the first place, even without, the hostility. I'm very glad to, tell everyone about my culture, and I make dumplings with my friends, and then people are also curious about my high school experience and about the Middle East, um people, most of the interactions I've had are just people genuinely curious to learn, and sometimes they don't know how to phrase certain questions, or sometimes they are very careful and they don't want to come off as aggressive um uh or questionable or anything. Then I'm like very glad to help these people. But from time to time in conversation interaction, if I sense that someone obviously is not here to learn, or if they are here just to prove their own points, or kind of like for a debate to prove that they are better, or they can be a better talker or something, then I realize, it's not really my place to, try to convince them or try
Mm,
to teach them or educate them. So I do feel like the responsibility of, at least from my day-to-day interaction, I can tell people about my own experience, and that can expose them to different views, whether that will change their views or not, but at least I can expose them to different views. And I also am very conscious. I don't want to position myself as like with like the savior mindset of,
mm,
oh, I am in a different country telling other people about your country where you can't do that. And I don't think I should and I would ever do that. And so but I still have this feeling of responsibility to at least influence other people on, a small scale level, about my own culture, my own country, and also the culture that I really grew up with and was exposed to.
mm, mm. Yes, because you're sharing it from your perspective. You're not trying to tell anyone that they should think something. You're just sharing from your own perspective, um, and also just really shedding a light on something, making it real versus a news headline,
Yes,
you know.
exactly.
Mm. So this has been a really interesting conversation because we've explored your own experiences of growing up in China, moving to Jordan, moving to the US, and how that is going to influence or potentially shape your future. But one of the things that really strikes me is that it could have been so different. And and not bad, not like different bad, but the opportunities that you are creating for yourselves, the responsibilities that you are choosing to put upon yourself, all of these things seem to have started with Jordan. They seem to have started with a move and with you then cultivating who you are in the surroundings you find yourself in and you evolving as you go. And so I want to thank you for bringing that all to life. And I just wonder if you have any comments about that and about how you, if there's anything you want to say as being that human who's had that journey, which is, you know, if I compare it to my own or something like that, it's my first move was at probably 19, in terms of this, if I parallel it to you, that kind of move wasn't until I was 19, 20. And I was cushioned to some degree at that age. Your cushioning was 5 years younger, you know, before, and by my 19, 20, you're very independent. So yeah, I'm just very curious how you want to say anything about that as a life experience.
Yeah, I actually think about how my life could have been different like all the time. It's because I do very much believe in like fate and also how like everything that's like meant for me is like will come like when it's like meant for me. And um when I was in elementary school, there was an opportunity because my mom had worked in Hong Kong for around 10 years-ish. So we had an opportunity to move to Hong Kong. But then at the time I was like, oh, I have friends here who actually I don't even talk to anymore, which is kind of sad. But you know, we didn't move. We chose to stay in China. You know, if we moved to Hong Kong when I was in fourth grade, that would have been a completely different life that I have right now. And if I chose to stay in China for high school, I will be in a very different place right now. You know, I will be graduating this May. Um, and if I, you know, there's so many minor things too. You know, if I never took the APR history class, if I took, you know, AP physics, you know, if I never took that class with my anthropology teacher from high school, if I never talked to him, and even just, you know, if I chose to go to this UK school versus the US school, and how my life would have been just so different. And it all comes back to the thought of honestly appreciation of my high school experience and the choices I already made instead of thinking about how it would have been different. Because I do think I am pretty complacent with where I am and what I'm learning. And um, I can't ever imagine like myself not finding anthropology. I'm so deeply passionate about it. And you know, it is in fact influenced by my high school experience. You know, if I didn't find passion or interest in cultures and people and society, then I probably wouldn't find anthropology to be such a big, you know, thing in my life. Um, but I think it all kind of makes sense in the end, like in terms of my personality. And then I love saying that the reason I'm studying anthropology is because I'm so nosy and I just want to get to know people more. And um, so I think Jordan, reflecting back, why always go back to the thought of appreciation. It has completely changed my life in a better way. Um, and if not in the best way, honestly. And it has opened up so many different opportunities for me, especially me as an Asian person, you know, being able to speak Mandarin and Cantonese and also Arabic. And it has opened so many doors and I have been exposed to so many different people and um I think very much broadened my like my worldview and my life experience. And it's something that I'm forever grateful for this country, the people, and like my high school teachers and my friends, and now people who are able to give me support in America too.
Mm, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much.